When my dad first told me this story as a kid, it gave me chills. I still remember every detail. Before going into the details, I'll give some context to set the setting and background of the incident. Bear with me. They totally add up to the scary element of the story. Back in 1985, my 19-year-old dad was serving in the Greek Army Special Forces, in the paratrooper division. Kind of irrelevant, but I'm a proud son, so I thought I'd mention it. Army service in Greece is mandatory for every male that has reached their 18th birthday, and so everyone has to go. Military camps, where each company is stationed at, are mostly positioned in the countryside, and usually there isn't much going on near and around the camp. They are fairly secluded. Closest town to my pop's camp was 3 kilometers away. One night while serving, it was my dad's turn to go on guard duty in the camp he was posted in. Every night, 5 or 6 soldiers were selected for guard duty, and they slept in the same barracks. Half hour before it was time for the previous guards to be relieved, another soldier would come in the room, wake up the new batch so they would get ready and go to their positions. Each shift was 2 hours. The 12 to 6 a.m. shifts were the worst according to my pops. It gets extremely cold in the winter and you're half asleep, standing beside your booth, freezing your butt off, while keeping watch. Only way to be vigilant and keep warm is if you take a few steps up and down. So it was 2 a.m. and my dad was standing next to his booth with his rifle, an M1 Garand. Yes, Greek Army used World War II weapons in the 80s. It was absolute silence. He could only hear the wind. He mentioned that the moon was helpful with visibility, but there's only so much you can make out at night, even with the moon, apart from dark shadows, especially at longer distances. There were some tree lines far away, but there wasn't much vegetation around the camp at all. It was more like a clearing. Everything is going well, like every other night. Until a tall, dark mass appears from the path coming out of a tree line, and it's headed right towards my father's booth. My dad's heart starts pumping when he spots it, and he says he's scared shitless at this point. The mass moves slow but steady, and is closing the distance, almost like floating, with big, slow steps. My dad does what he is instructed to do and what every guard does in a situation like this. Raises his rifle, aims and screams, "Halt! Identify yourself!" No reply. The shadow continues to approach. Second time, "Halt! Identify yourself!" Nothing. He told me that at this point he is certain he sees a ghost. He says he thought to himself, "Let's see if a ghost can die." Before he engages, he has to scream a code word that raises the alarm. The way that works is, the next guard on the next booth that is hundreds of meters away will hear the scream, then scream himself, and with a chain reaction like that, the alarm goes from booth to booth and reaches the patrol. The patrol is an officer with 5 soldiers that make the rounds between booths every night and make sure everything is okay with the guards. If you're caught sleeping or away from your post by these guys, RIP. They are also the ones to investigate an alarm. Only problem is the patrol might take a while to get to the booth that raised the alarm, as they don't know which one it is, and they might be far from the right one. They run double time, through every booth until they locate the original source of alarm. My dad hears the other guys screaming and he knows the alarm is raised. He knows that the patrol is going to be there in a few minutes. He also knows that the penalty for falsely raising the alarm is prison. Prison means a soldier gets X amount of days added to their service. The service back then was 2 years plus prison days that have been added to a soldier along the way from penalties. They don't actually lock you up in a cell unless you commit an actual crime. Then the military police comes in. But he doesn't have minutes. The eerie figure is 50 meters away and closing. He gets ready to fire. Then he hears, "Relax, John, it's me." Another soldier covered in a black blanket that my dad knew was trying to sneak back in the camp at night after having fun in the nearest town without permission. He was holding a bottle of liquor too and was fairly drunk. My dad let him through, but he knew that he was about to get serious amount of prison time for falsely raising the alarm once the patrol figured out it was his booth that the alarm was raised from. The patrol gets there. My dad doesn't snitch on the drunk guy. The officer tells him that they'll see each other the next morning. Next day in line, where the penalties are being announced by the officers, my dad is waiting to hear his name called, but they never mention him. Even though an alarm raise is extremely rare to happen, nobody tells him anything. Turns out the patrol officer and the ghost were buddies. The guy sneaking in told the lieutenant what happened and to not mention my dad. The officer apparently pulled some strings, and the whole incident was like it never happened. My mom has told me an alarmingly high number of creepy stories from her younger days, but this one in particular is the reason I triple-check my windows and doors before bed every night. This started when my mom was 23. She had moved out of her parents' house into a garden-floor apartment back in the early 80s. She grew up in Palatine, Illinois, northern suburb of Chicago, and was working as a bank teller. She was 5 foot and maybe weighed 100 pounds soaking wet. She was this cute young girl excited to start this next chapter in her life, and admittedly a little naive. Like any job, she became familiar with her co-workers, regular customers, and other workers who worked in the area that she would see often. She told me about a cute guy that would walk by the bank that she saw almost every shift. Her and the other bank girls would always chatter about how gorgeous he was, and one day, to my mom's delight, he came into the bank and asked her to dinner. Let's call him Tom. Tom offers to pick her up. She gives her address and they agree to 7 p.m. for that upcoming Saturday. Date went fine. She described him as awkward and nervous with a lack of anything to talk about. He dropped her off a few hours later, told him thanks, but when he asked her out for a second date, she politely declined and said she saw them more as friends. She went to work on Monday, gossiped with the girls a bit on the topic. They stopped seeing Tom walk by the bank, and my mom thought that would be the end of it. Sadly, it was just the beginning. After that, my mom forgot about him and met my dad at a local dive bar a few weeks later. I'll also state that the house, bar, and bank is all within walking distance from each other. 2 months go by since her date with Tom, and one night she gets home from work to find her apartment had been broken into. Front door is wide open, but all that was taken were some of her panties. Nothing else was touched aside from her underwear drawer. Weird, but she thinks this happens. It was a crummy lock, so her dad comes over the next day and puts deadbolts on the front and back door. Mind you, it's a garden unit. The back door is actually attached to the laundry room of the building, and that laundry room is directly accessible from the backyard without a key. A week goes by, and one morning she sees her upstairs neighbor, Janet, in the main hallway. Janet tells my mom that the night before when she came home from work, she saw a man at my mom's front door messing with the handle. Janet heard the fumbling and actually had my mom's spare key, so only reason she even walked down the stairs to the garden area was because she thought my mom may have been locked out. Obviously wasn't the case. She asked the man what he was doing, and he just ran up the stairs and darted out of the building. Mom luckily slept at my dad's that night. Nothing happens for another month. My mom tells me stories of how that month she always had a gut feeling someone was watching her, but never saw anything, so chalked it up to her being paranoid given what had happened. Then one stormy Friday night, my mom went to bed early because she had the morning shift at the bank. Lights out by 10 p.m. and her fan on full blast, she falls asleep right away. She wakes up around 2 a.m. to the faint sound of drilling. She thought it was odd, but it only lasted a couple of minutes, so she shrugged it off, thinking maybe a neighbor was making a late-night snack. She tries falling back asleep, but all of a sudden her fan turns off, and she realizes the power is out. She gets out of bed and sees that the houses across the street all still had their porch lights on. Odd, only her building is out? She's now getting really bad vibes and is standing in her living room, where both the front and back doors are. Standing in the complete dark, she hears banging coming from the shared laundry room area. Mom described being literally frozen just staring at the door when she suddenly sees the doorknob turn and a hand come in trying to undo the safety chain. She screams and bolts it out the front door and up to Janet's door, bangs on the door, and Janet lets her in. Mom is hysterical and Janet comforts her while her husband Ray goes to check everything out and ask a neighbor to call the police since they didn't have power to do so. Police check the perimeter, see nothing, and say they will come back in the morning once they can see what's going on in the daylight. Mom sleeps at Janet's. Next morning they come to find that someone had drilled a hole in the back door in order to bypass the deadbolt. They had cut the phone lines and power to the building. Sawdust was literally sitting in piles in the laundry room along with 2 peeps holes that see directly into her living room and bedroom. Someone had been watching her and thought the night of the storm was the night to make his move. Creepy. She moves back home, and they have zero leads on the case until Tom pops back up at the bank asking if my mom was around. She was away on a road trip with my dad for 2 weeks after the incident. The only reason he was caught was because he asked the other bank girls if my mom had quit and moved after her break-in. Nothing was ever posted in the newspapers, so there was no way he would have known that even occurred. Police go to interrogate him and they find my mom's panties along with a necklace she didn't even realize was missing. Guy has been in and out of prison. We're just happy he didn't get to her that night because who knows what would have happened. This happened in November of 2014. I went to Walmart to buy groceries while my 16-year-old daughter was attending her homecoming dance. I tried to do my grocery shopping to coincide with her 11 p.m. pickup. All at once I realized it was about 5 minutes till 11 p.m., and I was still standing in line to get checked out. About that time, one of their customer service supervisors walked by me, and I motioned to her explaining that I had to pick my daughter up, and if she could hold my cart, I'd come back and check out. She agreed and had someone take my cart to the cooler and told me to tell them at service desk when I got back. So off I go. I picked my daughter up and arrived back at Walmart about 11:15 p.m. She came inside with me, and as we were coming into the store, a man who looks to be in his 50s walked over in front just past me and peered down the front of my daughter's strapless pink dress, which from a couple hours of teenage booping around and dancing had become looser, and mentioned what he could do with her, and she happens to be well endowed. He had a female companion with him. When he walked in, I could see him and her out of the corner of my eye. I don't know if this was a girlfriend or relation to him, but she watched and heard him and said nothing. I felt like I was in a stupor, like did this just happen? I was stunned that anyone would have the audacity to walk up and say this to my daughter right in front of me. Walking right beside her, I became completely enraged and stepped between his leering eyes and my daughter. He asked her another inappropriate question starting with, "Is today?" After stepping in front of him and putting myself between him and my daughter, I asked him if today was a good day for him to die. Honestly, I was running on pure rage and adrenaline, which probably gave me more guts than brains in that moment. He glared at me and tried to walk in tighter to intimidate me. I told him to get the hell away, and he finally walked back over to who he was with, but continued to glare at me as they went on inside Walmart ahead of us. I absolutely couldn't believe this had actually transpired. My daughter was in tears and scared beyond all reason. I took her straight back to the women's department and had her put on a sweat jacket, zip it up, and paid for it with my groceries. If I'd have really thought about it and not been running on adrenaline and still having the shock factor going on, in hindsight, I should have left the store, called the police, and gone straight home. At the same time, the thought crossed my mind he might have followed us to the car, and then what? I think if she had been alone, regardless what she was wearing, he still would have approached her. If someone is this brazen inside a public store, what is he capable of, if in a dark, isolated place? The whole situation chills me to the bone. I think the only reason he walked away was because I stood up to him and didn't flinch. To have walked up to my daughter and stand so close to look down the front of her dress and say what he said is unbelievable. I just reacted with pure rage. I never went to Walmart that late at night again, and have warned my daughters to always be aware of their surroundings and not be carelessly talking on their cell phones.